Thank you, Ramesh, and thank you for having me.
Welcome.
I want to stress several things. A, it's a clear sign of India coming of age on the global stage. Remember, soon after the Honorable Prime Minister took his oath of office, he went to Italy for the G7 summit, where he met the leaders of the Western world. He also met President Zelensky of Ukraine. Thereafter, a visit to Russia, Moscow, very much on the cards. We have an annual summit which hasn't been held in person for several years, and therefore it was important to go there. Let me also put something else in perspective. While for us, it clearly shows that we have autonomous decision making in our foreign policy, we are multi aligned, we are with the West, we're also with the Russians, we're all with all those who are for global good and with us in our mutual interest. It also, in my opinion, shows the Russian interest in reaching out to India. Ramesh, remember that in the last year or two, much has been talked about Russia and its sort of blossoming relationship with China. Now, India is the other big power outside the Western sphere in the world. And the Russians also would be equally keen to, have India there and to tell the world that Russia also is not just a country with very few friends, China, North Korea, etc., but that they have partnership with India. So it's a mutually reinforcing and a signaling visit, extremely important, and it signals the place of India in the world as a global power, as a country which values its strategic autonomy and which will finally be working for global good.
Ambassador Puri, you've covered a lot of ground there in your opening remarks. Let me, pass your opening intervention to focus on the specifics. Now, just to put it in context for our viewers, when I refer to the timing, I also refer to the fact that it coincides with the 75th anniversary summit of NATO hosted by Washington, D.C., even as we speak. Now, that said, Ambassador Puri, I wanted to expand on something that you said there. You spoke about how India, to paraphrase you, has come of age on the world stage, number one. And number two, you referred to India's quote-unquote strategic autonomy. Is that non-alignment revisited?
Ramesh, thank you. I deliberately left out the NATO summit in Washington because, I don't want this to be a case that it was done simply to make the timing. It could have happened. Remember, the Honorable Prime Minister has just taken office for the third time. We want to signal continuity. He wants to signal that there's been success in the elections and he's back there with the same government, the same people essentially. There is also the issue that we have our budget session on, and so timings, etc., are important.
Right.
That it coincides or it's at the same time as that summit is taking place, fine. By that standard, one would say that with the West having its certain views on Russia, a physical visit should never take place. No, I don't agree with that. I believe the signaling is for people to read. India as an autonomous strategic power in the world, which has come of age, is something that we need to underline. And it's good for all of these particular things which are happening. Now, in terms of the other aspects that you touched upon, I have little doubt that in the conversations that will take place, the conversations will certainly touch upon bilateral relations, taking them forward. Indeed, as you mentioned, one of the very first things is a visit to the Atom Exhibition, an area of tremendous cooperation between India and Russia. But I want to just leave a thought with you. It's early in the morning.
Sure.
The whole world is talking about climate change, doing something about greenhouse gas emissions. The last several years have seen nuclear power kind of tainted. But it's important that countries which have abilities and technological abilities in this area look to try and see how we can harness nuclear power, both for energy requirements and because it does, in a sense, provide an answer to the issue of greenhouse gas. I think all of this is important. Russia, its technological hub, India, our abilities on the technological front, all of these should be harnessed.
It's interesting, Ambassador Puri, that you should touch upon climate change in the context of clean energy or civil nuclear energy. It's interesting because Russia, this might interest our viewers as well, is the only foreign country to actually implement or execute nuclear energy projects in India. India has signed pacts with several countries, including the US, France, and other countries. But Russia, as of now, is the only country that is operating civil nuclear power plants in India. Now, that said, looking ahead to the Modi-Putin talks, Ambassador Puri, how would you characterize the India-Russia summit, the 22nd summit, in terms of one, optics, and two, possible outcomes?
Ramesh, thank you very much. Look, the optics we have already spoken about. It signals India's coming of age. It signals India's autonomous foreign policy. It signals our strong bilateral relationship with Russia. And of course, we will use the summit to talk to the Russians on matters which have been widely reported, dialogue, foreign policy issues need to be settled across the table, no war, all of those particular things hinting at Ukraine. But I personally think one other important element which will come up, and I'm sure it will come up directly, is what the world is constantly talking about, Russia and its blossoming closeness to China. And given the fact that India and China, there are issues, and these issues are very serious. It's not just the border dispute, there are contestations of all kinds. And we need to reach out to the Russians in person and speak to them at the highest level that, look, we have a long and an abiding relationship of friendship that transcends anything that people can easily think of. And in this context, be mindful of India, India's needs, India's imperatives in this entire business of the relationship with China. And therefore, let the relationship between Russia and China not be any kind of lean against India. On the contrary, be there also to, in a sense, tell the Chinese that, look, India is a great country, a friend of the Russians, and this particular aspect is important. I'll just speak very briefly on the other side, which is Afghanistan, and of course, Pakistan as a result. In Afghanistan, too, the Russians have equities, they are important. The Chinese are building tremendously. We need that. Afghanistan is part of our extended region. We need to speak to them on all of these particular subjects. And it's important that we do so in person. Those COVID era is over. We hosted the G20 last year. We were the presidency. President Putin couldn't come, and we all know the reasons why it was willy-nilly not possible for him to be here in person. But taking up these relationships in person has a very special element. Chemistry, let me put it, does have a place in global relations.
Ambassador Puri, you spoke about China. I am tempted to ask you about Russia-China ties immediately, but I will stick to the bilateral for now. Do nuclear energy, space and defense remain the mainstays of the India-Russia ties, or do you think is India, for one, looking to diversify its trade basket with Russia?
Well, without any doubt, defense, space, nuclear are going to remain important. They can't be wished away. They are important for India. They are important for Russia. Over the last few years, especially with all these sanctions on Russia, we have become major importers of Russian petroleum products, including oil. Now, this has tilted the trade balance in favor of the Russians, something that used to happen 30, 40 years ago when we first signed the India-Russia rupee treaty. But, on the overall context, not only has it helped stem the Indian balance of payment situation globally, let me also leave a thought with you and your viewers. This has kept global oil prices stable. Can you imagine a market of India's requirements also dipping into the same pool which is now supplying the Western countries? It would have raised petrol prices on the pumps right through the G7 to a manner which would have been absolutely politically unacceptable to them. So, some things are for saying and some things are actually for doing, and that's important. Having said this, I want to draw attention of your viewers to Russia now evolving quite fast as a technology hub. Russians have always been very strong innovators, strong technology players, and given sanctions, a degree of innovativeness and entrepreneurship sort of inbuilt in yourself. And I am seeing, in terms of my interaction, Russian companies being strongly available there for sustainable development, on climate action, on energy usage, and all these particular areas. So these are all areas in which we must cooperate. Of course, we are large investors in Russia in the oil and gas sector. We need to encourage Russian investments in India across the board, not just in consumables, in the drugs and pharmaceuticals area. But finally, lastly, I'd also leave the thought with you. Prime Minister starts the day today by addressing the Indian diaspora. People matter. Over the last, let me say, not the past few years, but before that, for 20 odd years, Russia and its tilt in the Western direction was also obvious. You see it in terms of the market, people, their likes and dislikes. But we have an old abiding relationship. I belong to the era of the Raj Kapoor films in Moscow. Mera juta hai Japani, mera topi hai Rusi. That's the era to which I belong. And I want to point out that this relationship is particularly important. We should work on it. We should cherish it. We should nurture it both ways. India in Russia and Russia in India. And that's what will truly strengthen the relationship, because there is so much in terms of legacy and there's so much that can be done for the future.
Absolutely. Ambassador Puri, there's a lot more to talk to you about, including Afghanistan, which you referred to, connectivity insofar as India-Russia trade is concerned, rupee-ruble trade as well, and de-dollarization. I'll come to that in